College football nerds here doing a week one recap. Notre Dame and Miami just wrapped. We waited. It is 10:30 Central, 11:30 Eastern for Josh. And so we are finally able to talk about these games in totality. So this will make a good podcast episode. We might break up a couple of these if you want to watch just your individual one, but you're here, so just stay here and listen to us. I got Josh with me. He's going to get nerdy on a lot of this stuff, and we get now some actual data. We'll probably get into our top 10s maybe when we release our model and things like that, when there's some more information. But right now, these recaps are fun for us, and so we're going to do them. Josh, let's start with Texas and Ohio State. We both picked Texas. And a lot of that was based on the fact that Arch Manning had a little bit of experience, two new coordinators for Ohio State. I don't know that the crowd or the road situation rattled Arch so much as some of the observations we had about Arch coming out of high school, maybe still there. I didn't love what I saw from him, but I also think that that's a tough ask in your first start. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Texas, a little bit about Ohio State, but let's start with Texas and what you saw.
That game, it's interesting because this is the problem with all the week one games, and it's going to be a common theme for us, is everybody overreacts every time about how good or how much a team sucks because teams are being viewed in isolation without knowing how good their opponents are. And so however you want to view Ohio State versus Texas depends a lot on whether or not you think these are two elite defenses and they're just never going to find a unit that's as good as them through the rest of the season, or whether you think the defenses are merely good and then the quarterbacks were really struggling in a lot of different ways. And, the answer is usually somewhere in the middle, but not always. I mean, last year, Daniel, the big opener was LSU and USC, and there was a lot of talk about how good USC was going to be. Miller Moss was the hype train out the wazoo. I took a lot of heat because I broke down tape and said, hey, I think LSU kind of had a defensive meltdown in this game, but I actually saw a lot of concerning stuff from Moss. Had the same thing with Nico Iamaleava when he lit up nobody early in the year. And took a lot of heat because I had a lot of criticisms because I saw stuff on tape that was really concerning. But, when you look at scores without knowing what the competition level is, and a lot of times these big games may be more or less impactful, we don't know. So I say all that, Daniel, sort of to lead off. And I'll say, too, we do a model at collegefootballnerds.com. We don't release the model till week 4. We'll start releasing advanced statistics as we get a couple weeks in the season and we can start doing comparative statistics. Our model and our rankings do not use priors. We don't use recruiting rankings, and this is why. We're in the transfer portal era. You don't know who players are. Things change on a yearly basis. And so I think it's even more true these days that we don't know what we don't know, and assumptions are bad. Daniel, what I saw, though, turning specifically to Texas and Ohio State, Arch Manning, it's not that he didn't have a phenomenal day passing from a yardage perspective. It's how he had a bad day passing. There were so many times where he had a clean pocket or he had an angle to a guy and he threw it at his feet. His sidearm throws in a couple key plays. Drilling the ball as a word burner right at somebody's feet is bad. A couple times he threw deep and was either way late or off target, and it felt like the whole game, Daniel. And then I think is something that is rightfully concerning because it's not his first start. Let's be clear. He did start a couple games last year. We've seen him play before. Texas fans, look, they had a hard time accepting our point that playing a Mississippi State team who was by far the worst team in the SEC last year and probably by far the worst defense does not really translate to playing a game where you're not able to sit. Most quarterbacks sit on their spot, throw accurately. We made the same comment when we talked about the Michigan preview for Oklahoma. Bryce Underwood, of course, he looks good against New Mexico because he gets to throw in his own time, win his own footing. Iamaleava was the same thing. The mark of a quarterback is what they do when they're not on their spot. Texas was limited all day because of Manning. I will say Julian Sayin looked better, but Ohio State, this was a big comment I made at the time on Twitter. Ohio State did a much better job of taking Sayin and asking him to throw short, not trying to stretch the field because they knew there were going to be things he had to adjust to. They didn't know how he'd respond to a pass rush. And he is an accurate passer underneath, and he has a quick release, and they leaned on that. And they tried to let the skill position talent work and move down the field. And look, they scored 14 points, all they needed to do to win, mainly by that and one play that was really a circus catch by Carnell Tate. But on top of all that, Daniel, in all the surrounding stuff, one, I'll let you maybe make a comment about the throwing motions, all these quarterbacks, because it's like a weird thing this year. It's really strange to me in that Texas ran for 166 yards. Ohio State only ran for 29. James Peoples was 2 yards per carry in this game, while Wisner was 5. CJ Baxter ran for 4 yards a carry. Texas, from a per play standpoint, ran the ball much better, ran the ball much more consistently. Ohio State just got enough production out of the quarterback to win, and Texas didn't. And so when you talk about the quarterbacks being limiting or Arch Manning struggling, in all this context, Sayin's the first game starter. Manning was in his, third start, true start, with a better running game, with a lot of stuff going for him, and just didn't execute. So I do think it's concerning because Texas, I think if the quarterback swapped, or at least they got somewhat similar production, Texas probably is able to win that game. And I'm the one that tweeted, and I look, was intended to be sort of a loaded comment and commentary, that if they had Quinn Ewers, I think Texas wins the game. And that's not to say that I expect Manning to be Quinn Ewers out the gate in his first major start. I'm just saying it's kind of telling about where Texas is and the problems. That there was really no doubt to me with either team that if they'd had Will Howard or they had Quinn Ewers, that team would have won this game by maybe even a decent margin. Both these teams were limited by their quarterbacks. I think Texas was extremely limited by the quarterback. Doesn't mean that Arch Manning isn't going to be a better player. Of course, both of these teams, if they had last year's end of the year version, they would have been better. But it was really glaring, I think, how much quarterback play was the limiter here in a game where Texas could run the ball, but otherwise nobody could really do anything else.
I think it's fair to say, because we talked about going into this game, how unprecedented it was that a first-time starter was facing a top 10 team. And that was our concern with Sayin. And look, Ohio State fans are going to say, you were wrong, haha, whatever, because we picked Texas. But if we would have told you that Ohio State was going to have 215 yards and 14 points, you would not pick Ohio State. Ohio State's defense also deserves a ton of credit here. There was some concerns with Patricia coming from the NFL and maybe, not being fit for the college game. I think the defense looked great. Even with the run success that Texas had, I felt like Ohio State was midseason form on defense. I also think Texas looked really good on defense. For all, Texas fans, if they're any watching this, they're probably dejected a little bit, but maybe shouldn't be so much. Given how bad Arch Manning was, or how bad that passing game was in terms of just, not having any production, the fact that you still only gave up 14 points, given, short fields or turnovers or all the things that usually are a little more distributed throughout a game. When you score 20 or 25 points and you only score 7, you're giving the defense a lot more, or the other offense a lot more opportunities, and you still have a chance to win in 2 minutes at the end of the game. I think both these defenses are phenomenal. It wasn't just bad offense on both sides of the ball. Both these defenses are phenomenal. But what I do think this did, and even to a maybe lesser extent, but still there, Ty Simpson at Alabama and CJ Carr at Notre Dame, first-time starts against good teams, especially in some of these cases on the road, it's bad. And there is no way that Arch Manning, Julian Sayin, CJ Carr, Ty Simpson, Bryce Underwood, if he struggles against Oklahoma, there's no way that all of those quarterbacks are going to be bad, Josh. At some point, it's going to go from first game jitters into, all right, now I've got some muscle memory, and now I feel a lot better about it. Josh, talk a little bit before we move on to the next game about how, as tough as this game is to schedule and play in week 1, both of these teams have a little bit of breathing room before they play somebody of substance, and that might be where you see a ton of growth and maturation.
The first point I want to make is to your point about quarterback struggling. It wasn't that long ago where this team called Ohio State in 2014 ended up having a starting quarterback get injured at the beginning of the year. And they had this guy named JT Barrett that came out in their first start and kind of, like just struggled badly at Virginia Tech, right? It was week 2, lose 35-21. Obviously, they moved the ball more. But they were pretty bad. They turned the ball over. They weren't effective in the red zone. They didn't capitalize on major opportunities. There's a certain amount of poise that comes with it and experience in, hey, it's fourth down. Like, have the confidence to throw the way you normally want to throw. Don't throw the ball sidearm and drill it on them. And that 2014 Ohio State team ended up being one of the most dominant national champions ever. So, yeah, I mean, it is week 1. Teams are going to improve. These quarterbacks are all going to improve. A lot of teams that have been buried and viewed as dead. Arch Manning is a terrible quarterback because he had one bad game in his first meaningful start. It's way too early for that. Texas gets San Jose State, UTEP, Sam Houston, all before they play Florida. And that's a lot of time to really sit and improve and get reps. And again, it's not going to be, the most strenuous competition. It's not going to get you off your spot. But what it will do is help you build rhythm and consistency and get timing with a receiving core that's been largely rebuilt. I've got some concerns with Texas. We talk about quarterback. I think Wingo is a really, really great athlete, and he's a great piece. I don't know that he's a route runner or skill position player that is what you want from a number 1 wide receiver. Maybe he will get there, and he's flashed it at times. I don't think he's Arian Smith, but he's the example that I would give, where Arian Smith at Georgia was the most athletic and gifted receiver on the team, but the more they tried to run the offense through him, the worse things went because he was way too inconsistent and didn't do the little details right. Again, I don't think Wingo is that guy, but I also think Wingo doesn't necessarily excel at all the little things that Matthew Golden did that made him so exceptional. But they've got time to fix it. That's the important part. Ohio State, you get Grambling, you get Ohio, then you play Washington, then you play Minnesota, Illinois. It's a slow ramp up yet again, and you've got a few weeks to get used to the receiving core, get some time for Sayin to get comfortable. They'll figure out a scheme that works for him. They kept things close to the vest. Again, I really commend them for the way they did it. They were patient. They didn't try to feel like they needed to stretch and score even when the offense wasn't working. And it paid off because at the end of the game, they were able to put together a couple drives, even with penalties and everything else. It's all they needed to score to be able to win the game. And it was a winning strategy. Now they can figure out what Sayin really excels at, and they can build something around it and slowly ease themselves into, probably in that Illinois game, right, having to be better offensively. So the trajectory is just going to go up for both teams. They're going to be much better teams 5 or 6 weeks from now than they were today. We talked at the time we picked Texas. We said we probably would pick Ohio State in week 6. I think neither one of us expected Arch Manning to struggle as much as he did mechanically, and that was kind of the defining factor of the game, really. But for both these teams, they're going to be in a very different place. The quarterbacks are going to take huge steps forward. And football is a funny sport. You are really only ever as good as the quarterback lets you be. It's just the reality of it. And as these quarterbacks become more confident and comfortable in these systems, the systems they build around them, which are going to have their own limitations, are going to let these teams be much, much more effective.
Speaking of overreactions from week 1, I think there's a lot of overreactions being done in regards to Alabama for the bad and maybe for Florida State for the good. Let's talk about Alabama first. Watching that game live, I think that there's a lot, without a lot of context, it's shocking to watch. Partially because we're used to an Alabama team from the Nick Saban era, from the pre-NIL era, just killing everybody. And this is a 2-10 team. I'm going to let you get into that in a second. That they're struggling with. But I think that Alabama fans need to take a beat and consider a couple of things. First of all, there are some concerning things regarding maybe less material considerations like fire and drive and effort and physicality and speed and tackling that I think are a potential problem. But there also needs to be considered the fact that this game until that last score, which was really late in the game, aided by a stupid penalty. This was a one possession game. It didn't feel like it. It felt like Alabama was getting run out of the building by 30 points. And I think that's because of how the game started. And I'm pretty sure that the quarterback felt that and the coaching staff felt that. And that's why Ty Simpson ended up with 43 passing attempts. But Josh, I want you to talk about first. There's a couple of things that we can talk about in this game, but first, I want you to talk about, and look, this is no excuse. We're going to say very nice things about Florida State. I'm just trying to give some perspective on this game. Talk about the fact that for Alabama, they had two injuries, one on defense and one on offense, that happened right before this game, and were probably the two most important people on each side of the ball, maybe short of Ty Simpson, for this game, like the worst possible injuries that they could have had. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, Daniel, I am going to interject a bit and just say, we're going to talk about it in a minute, but I think there's not nearly enough credit given to Florida State of what they are. And you mentioned the 2-10 thing. I can't not bring it up. It irks me that people keep saying it's a 2-10 team and they turn around and beat Alabama. They were an undefeated regular season team 2 years ago, and people need to put a little respect to that name. People thought Norvell was a joke. They brought in DJU. They were not good last year. The defensively were terrible. They just kind of collapsed on themselves, quit on the team, et cetera, et cetera. But 17 new players for Florida State this year. This is a completely new squad, just like it was a completely new squad the year prior. And given that it's completely new, why do we think, we're so obsessed with what you did last year rather than the continuity of the coaching staff, continuity of the program? People view it completely differently, right, this year versus if Florida State last year had played Alabama in the opener and beat them after they were undefeated. Again, keeping in mind basically a complete roster overhaul either way, right? It's all new players. It could have easily been the same team last year. So a big part of all this is that I think Florida State is just being viewed as a trash team, and look what they've done versus Alabama, and people are just barely wrapping their heads around maybe Florida State's actually good. We don't know either at this point, but we may even come back to it because I think there are a lot of things I want to talk about positive, but I have to interject that first because I feel like there's so much of a focus on what Alabama did wrong that nobody wants to admit that Florida State did a lot of things right. That said, the thing that really hurt Alabama, I think, from the injury perspective, you got injuries to Jam Miller, you had injury to Keenan, their big nose tackle. Obviously, Alabama struggled a lot with a lot of things defensively, but the thing that really killed them was the simple dive play, the inside run play. Florida State consistently got yardage on the inside run, especially on first down, that set them up to be able to attack the edges or do a pop pass or something else over the top. If Alabama had that space eater where they could have been able to stuff some of those interior runs, or more importantly, just eat blockers, even on plays to the perimeter, even if Keenan's not a really active guy sideline to sideline, just to eat blockers and free guys to attack the line of scrimmage or attack gaps, it would have made a huge impact. And there were so many little plays in this game that Florida State, who, keep in mind, 5 transfer, fifth-year senior linemen, played at a high level and did all the little things right, and Alabama would make a small mistake, and between them and Castellanos and everything else, they'd capitalize, that broke the back for Alabama defensively in a lot of these drives. They weren't necessarily dominant drives down the field. A lot of them were really grinding drives. This was a 10-possession game on both sides, a short game because the drives were quite long. They weren't really overly explosive at the instant every single time. It was more that they were trying to grind it out, and Alabama would bend and bend and bend and bend until something broke. And more importantly, really, it got into Alabama's depth, which again, losing Keenan hurt because they ended up with freshmen on the field in key situations where normally that guy that might have been starting in this game would have been the guy rotating in for Keenan rather than that backup rotating in for a third-string freshman. The other guy you talked about was Jam Miller, and it was clear throughout the game that Alabama abandoned the run. I think they panicked when they got down early. That's on the coaching staff. It's also an interesting thing because Grubb really got fired at the Seattle Seahawks because he would not commit to the run and because he became too pass happy too often. But Jam Miller was a combination of a run and power they really didn't have in this game. Running against the 3-3-5 is an interesting thing. And there were a lot of times where they could get to the second level 3 to 5 yards deep. Riley was, I think, the number 28, the younger back that did it with some success. But the bigger guys, Richard Young and Daniel Hill, that they played with, didn't have the explosion. So when they hit the hole, and there usually was something of a hole, by the time they got through it, let that 3-3-5 collapse down at the linebacker and safety level and sort of stop them. I think in both cases, it would have had a real positive effect. I think Keenan would have a really structurally positive effect for that defense. Offensively, one, Jam Miller, I think, would have been more effective. But two, I think Alabama would have stuck with the run. And what really happened in this game negative for Alabama offensively, when I went back and rewatched some of it, it was really in the third quarter where they kind of fell apart and just kind of collapsed. They had a mental collapse really in the late third quarter. Up to that point, they've been pretty consistent, but they didn't stick with the run. They didn't try to have a consistent offense, and that was a big part of why they stalled. I think with Miller, one, he'd been more effective, but two, I think they also would have stuck with a game plan. And if they'd run the ball more, look, I don't know that they would have won, but I think they would have looked like a much more coherent offense.
A lot is being said about Ty Simpson and him not having a great game. If you watch the first two drives and the game was still in doubt before Florida State just went on a tear, he actually looked really good. He made good off-platform throws. He made good reads, really strong, drove the ball well. But then two things happened. One, it looked like Alabama at one point it felt like Alabama was not going to force a punt the entire game, which changes the psyche of how you coach, the plays you call, which is why Ty Simpson threw 43 passes. But it also puts a different mental psyche on your quarterback who now knows I've got to score 30, 40 points to win the game in my first start on the road in a crazy environment. Doak was nuts yesterday, to their credit. And that's a lot to put on a first-time starter. It really is. And I think that there are some overreactions there because at some point in the game, I think it was in that third quarter, you saw a shift where, one time he could have easily run for a first down, and instead he pulled the ball out and threw a worm burner. He was holding the ball a lot longer later in the game. A lot of things looked like jitters late that didn't look like that in the first couple of possessions. And some of that's probably script, but some of that is him knowing, crap, the O-line's not blocking great, although a little better than maybe people gave him credit for. I can't run the ball, or the team can't run the ball, and the defense sucks, which means it's all on me. That's a lot to put on a guy who's in his first start. And saying all that, I don't think it's nearly as bad as people are reacting to now. There are still some concerns. And I think there are opportunities. Another thing that people don't maybe realize that, and maybe you can touch on this a little bit, but like scheme-wise, this is one of the few teams, maybe not just the Veer, maybe it is more like, uniquely fast running quarterback, a lot of lateral movement, eye candy, not having Tim Keenan in there. But Alabama's going to destroy Wisconsin in 2 weeks because of the offensive scheme that Wisconsin runs. And people probably overreact in the other direction for Alabama then. Talk about that a little bit, and we'll get into Florida State.
Yeah, we had a whole segment about how I didn't, I had this game as a blowout, right? We were completely wrong on that and who we had predicted. Again, I don't really feel bad about it because it's a Florida State team with 17 new starters. We did not know who they would be. To your point, Daniel, it's hard to say whether or not we were completely wrong or I was completely wrong in thinking Alabama's deficiencies last year versus Veer teams wouldn't happen versus this Malzahn scheme. Obviously, it did, but did it happen in the same way? And I'll tell you that was the weird thing I saw on tape. When you look last year, right? What made Alabama a bad team last year? Let me throw out some numbers, okay? So if I told you that Alabama versus Florida, 2.28 yard per carry, 6.04 yards per attempt. Does that sound about right?
Versus Florida?
Florida. You're already getting the hint. Those are the numbers Alabama had going in the last two drives versus South Florida last year. 2 or 3 drives. I forget which. They scored 3 touchdowns late, before those last three scores, they were at 2.28 yards per carry, 6 yards per attempt. These things we saw in the Florida State game from Alabama aren't as new as people want to make them out to be, but it's also not as uniquely suited to the opposing defense and scheme as people want to make it out to be. Having a lot of young players in, rotating and screwing up, was something they did in their opener against South Florida. The difference with South Florida in that game was Byron Brown for South Florida couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, but they had guys running free, as I recall from early in that game. But remember, that was a game where Alabama looked like, that's why I recall it. They looked like they were going to lose late. I mean, they went into the fourth quarter 13-14, down up a point on South Florida, and it wasn't until the very end of the game that they blew them open. I mean, this has been a trend. And what I will say for Alabama, when you view it that way, is I think the scheme matters. But one, I think it matters because the inside linebacker play was terrible. When I went back and rewatched it, Lawson, number 0 for them, is supposed to be their stud. He's clearly not healthy. He's maybe 80%, can't run. So he can't pursue laterally in this game. The linebacker Jefferson that replaced Campbell, went in the first round of the draft, seemed completely lost. Seemed to be pretty fast, but clearly a massive downgrade from Campbell in this game. And then they had a transfer from Colorado who's just not very mobile and couldn't contain laterally. Those are all new problems. They weren't the same issues they had last year. If you look at the last year's game against Vanderbilt, I mean, the thing that I think flies under the radar there is they stopped the run fairly well against Vanderbilt, right? It wasn't the veer rushing attack or the inside run game that really killed them. And I'm pulling up the box score right now. Vanderbilt ran the ball for 3 yards a carry in the game. Their star running back had 64 yards and 20 carries. Pavia had 56 on 20. They lost the game because they gave up 12.6 yards per attempt, 250 yards on just 20 passes. This was a very different ball game. They got hit a couple times through the air. One in particular, just on a wheel route, but that was all happening because they were getting gashed on the ground. It was due to linebackers with a very different set of problems. They have an injured linebacker, the other one not being very good. Wasn't the same thing as they had happened last year. So it's a lot of new and a lot of old. And on some of this, Daniel, you talk about not being as bad. Again, I think they looked worse to open last season, and they were one of the best defenses in the country to end the year. They were terrible versus South Florida, just lucky they couldn't throw the ball. They were awful versus Vanderbilt in a very different way. I think this was more injury related for them. I think the scheme exposed real deficiencies at linebacker that they're either going to solve through personnel or health. They're going to get a better nose tackle, and it's also a unique scheme to exploit all that. And Daniel, this is where I'd really like to get into Florida State, because I think Florida State had a lot of players. They had speed at quarterback, they had speed at running back, they have speed at receiver, that when you combined all that together was uniquely able to exploit these deficiencies that Alabama had and the lack of assignments. Again, I don't think Alabama's D-line was even that bad when I went back and watched it. Not really. And I watched the game with a former starting center from cousin from a big player, one of these games playing right now. And, he commented, look, the D-line's really doing their job. The linebackers just can't fill. And a lot of the reason they couldn't fill was all the stuff Florida State did right, the scheme Florida State did, how well they executed it, and the pieces they had to run it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the shock, back to what you were saying earlier, is people saying, well, Alabama just got worked by a 2-10 team. And to your point, we have the Florida State of 2 years ago that did a ton of transfer portal work, and it worked. And then we have 1 year ago where it didn't work. So you don't know what you don't know, and we took the line that the transfer portal wasn't going to save them enough to beat an Alabama. Obviously, it did. I think also adding Gus really helped out a lot. They looked better defensively too, but in this game, there were a couple of very crucial penalties, and there were a couple of very big plays that, if they don't break the way they broke, this is a really tight game. And that's not to take anything away from Florida State, because I still think Alabama's a good football team. But to your point, they added a lot of speed, and they added really what has been classically considered as like SEC speed and athleticism. that they didn't have last year, that they did have a lot of 2 years ago. And I looked down their schedule. We talked about this earlier, Josh. I wouldn't be surprised if this scheme isn't quite as effective against some of the defenses they play this year, but I do think it's going to be really good. And I wouldn't be shocked if this Florida State team goes 10-2 and makes the playoffs. And that is a thing that I would not have said a week ago. Like, I picked Alabama to win, I think, by 16 points, partly because I was really high on Alabama, but also because I wasn't that high on Florida State. And so while I do think this game was probably a little closer than the score indicated and could have been a little better in week 6 or 7, I also came away from this game thinking a lot more people need to be talking about Florida State than just talking about Alabama sucking. Because I think if you say Alabama sucks, and I kind of think I've alluded to it last night, and I overreacted. If you say Alabama sucks, you take away a lot from what good there is to say about Florida State. And in this game, they earned this win, and they did exactly what they needed to do. And to a point you were saying before we started rolling, they executed in a way that you really don't expect transfers to be able to execute in week 1, and that's a testament to this coaching staff.
Yeah, I mean, again, 5 transfer offensive linemen, all fifth-year seniors. When we did the preview, my assumption was these guys running Malzahn's scheme would not be able to execute it at a high level in week 1. And they did. There were not a lot of misblocking assignments. They weren't running into each other in the backfield. Florida State looked like a well-oiled machine with a set of transfer starters. That was the thing that really determined this game. It's so easy to take for granted how many times Florida State was in the right position to make the right play and made it. How many times they had a wheel route out of the backfield, it was timed correctly, they hit the guy, he runs down the field, he scores. It's easy to take for granted that the guy running the wheel route down the field is also Jalen Lucas, who was a very small guy, receiver, running back, wasn't really utilized well in the prior system, but in Malzahn's scheme, which has a lot of jet sweep components where they have really one main inside ball carrier and they like to have a gadget speed guy. Corey Grant was their guy, if I recall correctly, in 2013 that never really got recognized for who he was because everybody was focused on the rest of that offense. Those are the guys that make that scheme work. And when they compare, they paired like Jalen Lucas, they paired, Micah Danzy, and they paired them with, transfers and Sawchuk, Roydale Williams. The combination of those guys all doing their role is what made it effective. And something I talked about in the preview before was that Castellanos didn't really have big rushing games last year. I think he had one game over 75 yards. Something under the radar, he only had 78 yards rushing in this game. Castellanos was a huge key to what they did because of his ability to convert in unique situations and avoid negative plays. I don't think Castellanos alone would have won him this game. I mean, again, 78 yards, 4.9 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown. His longest run, Castellanos' longest run in the game was 14 yards. He was not a major factor with his legs. And even throwing, the thing that made him work throwing the football is he made the right decisions at the right time. He popped the ball out, he made good reads, and he hit some of his pop passes. Hit one downfield shot early when he saw one-on-one where a guy got beat. Alabama was inexplicably having a true freshman in a 3rd and 11 in a key situation early in a P4 game. It seems like coaching malpractice. Yeah, but that was them doing what they needed to do. And it's so easy to take for granted that, yeah, Squirrel White, Castellanos played a lot of football, made the correct read that we've got a one-on-one with a freshman, steps back 2 steps and took his shot quick. It was decisive and it was catchable. That play doesn't get thrown a lot and it doesn't get caught a lot. Sometimes it's overthrown. Florida State did that right the whole game. And if that's who they are, if they're executing at that level, I made this comment to you, Daniel. Like Georgia Tech comes in with a lot of hype on that offense with Haynes King, how they played versus Colorado. Florida State, in almost all phases of this game offensively, is a better version of Georgia Tech. They have a better runner in Castellanos. They have a better offensive line. They have better receivers with Deuce Robinson and Squirrel White. And even though they didn't catch a ton of passes, I want to give a shout out to the fact Deuce Robinson was driving guys downfield. Big receiver transfer from USC. They're good. They're just good all around offensively. Defensively, they got a lot of pressure in Alabama. This is where I'll say in the secondary, when I went on rewatch, I will say I've got some questions about how good the pass defense really is, because there were a lot of guys open a lot. They just didn't give Alabama the time to hit them. Now, being able to stop the run was a huge change, because they were a horrible run defense last year. They were very, very, very good in this game. The ability to get pressure is huge. I'll be curious how well the secondary does or does not hold up an ACC play. But Daniel, again, put some respect on this name. Florida State played winning football. This was, from what I've seen so far, really Miami is the only other offense I think maybe on the tier of what they could be. Again, not knowing quite what Alabama was, what was right or wrong. I don't think, Daniel, this is a Vanderbilt 2024 situation with Alabama. I really don't. I don't think this is a game where their defense was just horrid and making stupid mistakes. I think Florida State's just good. I think this Florida State team is a borderline playoff team. I think they have a very good shot of going 9-3 or 10-2. I think the defense is going to be the real question in the back seven, more so even maybe than the front seven, though it may be defense overall. But offensively, I think they're going to be extremely hard to stop for teams all year. The Castellanos can be up and down. They're going to be in games against better physical front sevens with better linebacker play where they're going to have to throw it. It's going to be interesting to see how well they can do it. But in the ACC, with this schedule only having at this point, you go down the schedule, Daniel, you got one ranked game against Miami, one ranked game against Clemson, and a ranked game to end the year currently against Florida. Otherwise, East Texas A&M, Kent State, Virginia, Pitt, Stanford, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, NC State, very manageable for them to get to 9-3, and they can get to 9-3 now without winning another ranked game. This is a Florida State team that I think is going to finish ranked, and probably going to finish ranked pretty highly if they play.
Yeah, and they need Alabama to be good too, and that gives them even more breathing room because they've got that win in their belt, and that's why scheduling these big games can help you. Florida State's got 3 good teams left on their schedule that could beat them. If they win one of those, I think they're in the playoffs. All right, Josh, really quickly, 2 more games to talk about, Clemson and LSU. I had this theory about Lenore Sellers and Cade Klubnik that they got a lot of hype at the end of the year last year, but maybe had been kind of figured out and just had a couple of big games. Cade Klubnik came a little bit down to earth. We talked about Nussmeier being a big volume guy and not being hyper efficient. So his 6.1 yards per attempt is not surprising to me. But Clemson's inability to run the ball at all and Cade's inability to really make the same kind of plays that he made against Texas defense last year tells me 2 things, Josh. I want your opinion. One, I do think we were somewhat justified in saying Clemson is getting top 5 hype. They were 1-4 against ranked teams last year. Cade Klubnik struggled a lot except for a couple of games. Maybe they're the team that lost to South Carolina at home 2 weeks before the playoffs, or 2 games before the playoffs, and why are they top 5 now? They return a lot of experience, but that experience went 1-4 against ranked teams last year. But 2, LSU's defense has probably improved since last year.
Look, again, in week 1, we've said this with every preview, it's impossible to know what teams are. I'll reiterate, when we release our model, I don't use priors. It would make our model more accurate, but I don't do it because I want to see just within this season what are these teams really, right, relative to this year's competition. Because priors end up just confirming, what you already think. It's confirmation bias. It's going to tell you Texas is great right now, even though, they lost. We don't know what we don't know about these 2 teams. We don't know if offensively they're having issues. We don't know if defensively they're great. Fans are going to take whatever tack they want to take because, they're going to see the spin they want to see. And frankly, it's the same reason even the coaches don't know how good their own teams are coming out of camp, because you don't know when the team plays itself how good they are. You don't know if the offensive line's good or the defensive line's bad, right? Same deal here. I mean, it's different teams. We still don't have any other external data points to be able to really judge it. But Daniel, I will say this. LSU almost certainly had to improve defensively because they struggled with running quarterbacks last year. A lot of that, I think, was due to safety play and filling alleys. They seem significantly upgraded, a lot more consistent in that regard in this game. Klubnik is a dangerous runner. They held him to 1 yard rushing in the ball game. That is not an easy thing to do. I do think Klubnik in those games where he starts to get sort of stifled, sometimes his head starts spinning. I think we saw it here. I am high on Clemson's receiving core, not as high as some, but I do think they're very good. But they just weren't really able to capitalize on it. From an LSU perspective, long game, but 29 rushes, 39 passes, 6.3 yards per passing, 3.8 yards per rushing. More importantly, though, Caden Durham ended up at 4.4 yards per, which is kind of, I think, the more important part. Your lead back is effective. LSU did enough to win the game offensively. They weren't great. They weren't pretty. Clemson was not a good defense last year, but they may have improved tremendously. I know they feel like their defensive coordinator situation and whatnot is much better. But I will say the highs and lows of them. One, I think they did take a step back at offensive line with the departures they had. The injuries they had in this game also really complicated that. Two, I think what we're going to see from Nussmeier is a lot more small ball, because when you look at the receiving core, Aaron Anderson, Berrien Brown, Hilton Jr., those guys to me are really good athletes in space, but they don't have great downfield route runners like they're maybe used to. There's no Jamar Chase, there's no Justin Jefferson certainly on this roster to me. It's somebody that can run a deep route, bend a defensive back, and make a catch with length down the field. This is just not this roster. So they're going to have to play more short ball. I think Nussmeier is good enough to do it. And what they want to be is a really high completion percentage, 7-yard per attempt team. I think that's what they're going to try to be. 7 yards every pass play, rather than 14 yards every other play, which is a different style of throwing the football. You can be effective that way, but it also makes it a lot easier to defend if they can't really get that deep ball going. And again, their longest passing play in that game was 39 yards. They did not have, interestingly, I'll say neither team in this game had a 40-yard play of any type. Clemson didn't even have a 25-yard play. So I think, to me, Daniel, it's going to be interesting to see where these defenses are. It's going to be interesting to see if there are continue to be limitations at quarterback. You guys know, if you follow us, I'm not that high on Klubnik. Frankly, I'm not that high on Aller either. I think they can be gamers. I think they're reasonably good quarterbacks. I think they're limited, and I think there are times where he doesn't play well. I am high on Nussmeier. I think the only reason his stats aren't better is the type of offense they're having to play. But we're going to have to see through the year if this is an offensive limitation or defensive efficiency thing, because it certainly was a grinded out game, Daniel. And yeah, I mean, they had their moments and they had their times when they looked good, especially I think more so LSU than Clemson. LSU seemed to really, really outplay Clemson in my mind. I mean, they had outgained them by about 100 yards. But it's still a ton of unknowns for me out of that game. But, Daniel, I'll let you lead with this. I think the only thing that matters if you're an LSU fan is you won the game. And again, I don't mean to be poo-pooing them at all. We picked them wrong again. Everybody cheered when I picked Clemson to win this game. What matters is you got the monkey off your back. You won an opener. You looked better in the opener. And every single year, they've looked bad in the opener and later better in the rest of the season. Maybe starting on a higher note with a win is a sign that they're going to improve continually.
Well, one of the things we said, too, going into this game was LSU probably needed this game a little bit more, given how much harder their schedule is than Clemson. So for the two, if you're rooting for both of these teams equally to have a great year, then you want LSU to win this game. Because Clemson, it sounds tough to say to Clemson, but Clemson, they can lose this game and drop another one against who? Because maybe Florida State or SMU, and still make the playoffs. They go 10-2. They're probably going to make the playoffs. Got South Carolina at the end of the year. LSU's got Florida, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Texas A&M, Alabama. Like potentially the hardest,
they've got 6 ranked teams in their schedule to go. I mean, it's a brutal
potentially
schedule.
The hardest or second hardest game on Clemson's schedule left is also on LSU's schedule, and it's probably the 5th toughest team that they're going to play. So I think, again, if you're pulling for both of these teams to have a great year, you want LSU to win this game. But it's also another game Clemson lost at home. And so I need to see them stomp some people. And, it's not like these other teams that are breaking in quarterbacks that are going to get a lot better throughout the year because they're going to get to play those crap teams until they play another good one. Klubnik's been around. So I do like this defense, and I think that that's part of why LSU didn't have a lot of explosives because they had, they were facing a really good defense on the road. If you look at the top two running backs, though, for LSU, they did average 5 yards a carry. Like it was like 20 carries for 100 yards. I think that's good against this Clemson defense. So there's some really good potential positives for LSU, and I think they're going to be a better team than their final record shows. But hopefully the committee weighs that. All right, Josh, one more. We are running long. You said 30 minutes. We might hit an hour. Notre Dame and Miami, this game just wrapped up as we're recording this. And CJ Carr played probably the best of the first-time starters for the big programs this weekend. But a ton of his yards, I think, came on two throws where they were wide open. I think he acquitted himself quite well, especially in the second half after they got down big to Miami, and really made this a game. So that's to his credit. But I do think that this game also fits into that mold of first-time starting quarterbacks are really struggling. The way Notre Dame's defense played in this game, I feel like if you swap quarterbacks, this game is not close. Which tells me, Josh, that this year at least there's a premium on returning good experience at quarterback because, we flagged this at the beginning of the year. Like 8 of the top 10 teams in college football are replacing their quarterback, and then some of the ones that are coming back aren't that great. Having a Carson Beck might be a massive advantage based on how much these first-time starting quarterbacks improve.
I mean, I don't think there's any doubt in this game that Beck, at least through the beginning 3 quarters of the game, being the experienced guy is what won him the game, right? I mean, it's kind of funny. CJ Carr ended up with a higher yard per pass attempt, 7.4 to 6.6. That's really deceptive, right? Because they had that one long 65-yard play that was really a bust late in the game. Other than that, he was at 5.4 yards per attempt. And I think at one point he was even maybe below
he was in the
4 yards per
threes
attempt.
at one point.
I think somewhere around halftime. Yeah, I think, frankly, Miami's defense kind of started to bust. And I thought, really, we talked to each other and we're like, is Cristobal going to drop another one of these? Because it looked like Miami had this thing in hand and was just going to give it up. 17 points in the fourth quarter, right? I'm sure every fan felt that way. But, I make this point a lot. Every quarter counts the same in college football. You win games in the first 3 quarters, not in the final frame. And everybody focuses on that. But the reason Miami won this game is they were the most consistent team through all 4 quarters. They had a pretty miserable fourth quarter in a lot of ways, defensively especially. But, through the rest of the game, that consistency at the quarterback position was a big differentiator between the two teams. I thought Carr played better later on. I picked Notre Dame close, which again, I can never get 3 teams I can never get right. All kind of coming into play the same week this week. But I think we were right that the running game was going to be a big factor. I mean, Price was 45 yards on 6 carries. Jeremiah Love, 33 yards on 10 isn't great, but it also wasn't terrible. They ran the ball pretty well. They just 16 yards on 11 carries for Carr because he scrambled a little too much. I think Notre Dame did not do a very good job of getting the ball to the running backs as often as they should. This has been a pet peeve of mine for years, as you know, Daniel. When you look at run-pass splits, it looks 50-50. But the truth in this game is I usually look at running back versus quarterback splits as being more telling. 30-28 sounds great, but when you look at it as 41-16, 41 passes or throws by Carr and only 16 touches to the backs. Daniel, that's not good. Price and Love are too good to have that few touches. Notre Dame did not lean on their real strengths, which is the running game. Something that we've complained about for years that they haven't wanted to hear is the wide receivers are just not great. I think they're better than they have been, but they're not massive impact guys, and that still showed. Meanwhile, Miami, their receiving core is rebuilt. I think they looked good. I'll see where they end up all long term. The more important part is that they have a guy in Carson Beck that can really throw the football. And I said in the preview, I felt like Carson Beck was really underrated. I think he is underrated. He made one throw here with that long one-handed catch that really kind of won them the game, as it turned out, was a phenomenal throw and a phenomenal catch by Miami. Not many quarterbacks right now make that play at this point in the season. Defensively, Miami looked a lot better than they did obviously last year. It was completely rebuilt. Again, we flagged that in the preview. We felt like they were going to be a good team. Notre Dame in this game defensively looked as good as I expected. They played good defense. They got run on some, which is telling maybe to how much Miami's rebuilt. Maybe also be reflecting the fact that Notre Dame lost some key players to graduation in the NFL last year. But Daniel, I will leave you with this, and I'm curious if you agree. You know, we said going into the preview that I felt like Notre Dame and Miami was actually a better pairing of teams than a lot of the teams ahead of it. And having watched LSU and Clemson, having watched Ohio State and Texas, honestly, Daniel, I don't know for sure that Notre Dame and Miami are that much worse than Texas and Ohio State right now. And quite frankly, just to my eyeballs, I think these two teams are actually better than either of LSU or Clemson. Like, I think these teams were underranked. I think they're really good football teams. I still think we're going to have massive shakeups in the top 10, even with Alabama falling out. I think we really don't know where anything shakes up. But these are two teams that I think you have to keep an eye on, because I think, man, Miami looks legit. Getting this win is huge, and they're going to have a good rest of the schedule going forward.
Josh, this is why I'm glad that we're not doing a top 10 this week, because what does everybody have to do? They got to put Ohio State number one. If you're being completely honest, if Ohio State played Miami today, are you picking Miami or Ohio State?
I probably pick Ohio State because of the defense, but honestly, Miami's offense right now, with how they're executing at the quarterback position, is just better. It's just better.
Well, like they just
defensively, I think Ohio State may be so good, but it's not a clear-cut call, though, Daniel. I will say it's not actually a clear-cut call to me right now.
I mean, Miami just put up 27 points on a defense that's probably as good as Ohio State's. Like, Notre Dame's defense is legit. If nothing else is going right for them, that defense comes to play. But I say all that to say the pressure is, Ohio State beat number 3, so we got to put them, or beat number 1, so we got to make them number 1, because nobody else has beaten anybody. The problem is nobody else has really played anybody. So Florida State's going to get ranked. We're going to overreact to Florida State. We're going to overreact to Alabama. We're going to dump them maybe out of the top 25. And we're probably going to shoot Auburn up the ranks. We don't know how good Baylor is. Clemson and LSU, what do we do to those two teams? We're going to overly punish Clemson. We're going to move LSU to number 5 or whatever. I love that we're not doing a top 10 this week, because there would be that pressure to put Ohio State number 1. And look, they did beat Texas, so that counts for something. But right now, I don't know that Ohio State is the best team in the country. I have a reason to suspect that ranking them number 1 now won't make you eat a lot of crow at the end of the year, because even if they're not number 1, they're going to be up there somewhere, because I think they're going to be good. But that's a projection. Based on what I've seen right now, I don't know that I would have Ohio State number 1, and that's why I love that we wait a little bit. Same thing with our metrics. Like, models right now tell a really perverted story about what these teams and these games are actually going to look like. One quick note on Notre Dame. Notre Dame, you don't care about this game. Other than you always want to beat Miami because it's Miami, Notre Dame. Look, you got Texas A&M next week. If you win that game, you're in the playoffs. I gave Notre Dame a lot of credit for their scheduling last week, and I stand by that because they're trying with Miami, Texas A&M, USC. But Boise's trash, so that was one game that was going to bolster them a little bit, even if it was a G5. Texas A&M might not be good. Like, they struggled in the first half against, I think, an FCS school this weekend. They might not be good. They might be good, but if you win that next week, what do you get? Purdue, Arkansas, Boise State, NC State. Those are all bad football teams that you should crush. USC might be good. We don't know. Boston College is going to suck. Navy's going to suck. Pitt's going to suck. Syracuse got blown out by Tennessee, and then you got Stanford, who is absolutely FCS quality. So if Notre Dame is merely good, not great, not elite, merely good. They've lost to Miami and they're still in the playoffs. This is not an indictment on Notre Dame. We've said before, Clemson has had easy schedules in the past and won national championships. They can't help that Purdue and Arkansas suck. They can't help if USC is not elite this year. But if they win next week, I'm calling it now, if they win the next week, or on the 13th, they are in the playoffs. That is, I think that they'll go 11-1 or 10-2, and they will make the playoffs because of just how their schedule is out. I say all that to say, keep scheduling these games because you can lose one now in the new era, and it doesn't hurt you that much. But I do think the better team won this game, at least the better team right now. Again, I'll say CJ Carr's got a lot of room to grow and opportunities to grow. I think he's going to be a much better quarterback at the end of the year than he was at the beginning. And he showed me a lot in that fourth quarter. Josh, we're running late. Wrap us up for week 1 and we can get out of here.
The main thing I'll say out of week 1 is I think we're all reacting to games in large part because of which team had the more experienced or the better quarterback in week 1. 2014, Ohio State had their quarterback go down. JT Barrett came in. They lost to Virginia Tech. Ended up being one of the best teams in the playoff era. We don't know who any of these teams are. Teams are going to drop bad games because they have young, new quarterbacks starting. Those quarterbacks can, JT Barrett ended up being one of the most efficient passers in college football. And even then, they lose him and they have Cardale Jones come in the playoff. We don't know what teams are going to be. Teams are all going to get better. Every week 1, every year in college football, we forget how much turnover there is, and we say everybody sucks. Everybody sucks. Because we compare them to the final season form, ready, built, refined teams we saw at the end of the year where they have all their schemes down, they know who the right personnel is, and they got a lot of repetition. All these teams have a long ways to go. A lot of these teams are going to improve. Teams that lost Saturday might replay 10 weeks from now, and you'd get a completely different result, or one team would dominate the team that beat them today. So, I think across the board, this is 1 week in a long season. We're in a 12-team playoff era, and, these losses or wins don't matter too much. What matters now, even if you're the team that won, is how well you develop your team, how well you're positioned when you get to the playoff to make that run in order to win a national title. And you know what? Hey, it's fun. It's exciting. It's college football. We got a long way to go, and we're happy you guys are here watching with us. So certainly if you made it this long and you watched the entire 1-hour video or whatever this is, please like, subscribe, share this video wherever you watch your podcast. It helps us out a ton. It's a labor of love for us. This isn't our job. But we carve out a lot of time to do this from pretty busy schedules. So the more you do to, help us and support us, the more we want to continue to put out content. And certainly let us know if you like this kind of recap video, because we don't always get the chance to do it. And quite frankly, if this doesn't get shared, not many people actually end up watching it. Thanks, Daniel.
All right, thanks for holding on this long. It was a long one, but this is the kind of content that we like to do. We get to do deep dives and discuss things that we actually saw in the field. The hypothetical stuff, the preview stuff, we like doing, but it's a little bit more challenging. We like reacting to the stuff that we actually saw. So hopefully, if you like this, you will share, you will comment, and you'll let us know, give us that feedback, that we'll do some more of these every week as long as y'all like them. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. Enjoy week 2 of college football, and God bless.